Hey, what's going on guys? Welcome back to another Eidolon hunting video. Today's video is going to be going over Trinity. Trinity is the core of most Eidolon hunting groups, and is most definitely a frame you want to have during the fights. I'm going to be going over my personal Trinity build, talking about how to build her, and then going over and showing some examples of how to play her during the Eidolon hunt. But before we get into the build, let's look at her abilities. For the Eidolon hunt, you only care about Trinity's Blessing. Her 1 through 3 abilities are not useful for this. Now you might say, well, Energy Vampire gives you energy. And yeah, it does, but it's hard to find targets where it'll work, and you're going to have very small range with this Blessing build, making Energy Vampire really not useful for gaining energy during the hunt. My main suggestion for energy during the hunts is using Energy Restore Pads, which I went over in my Eidolon Hunter equipment video. Now the reason Trinity's Blessing is so good for the hunt is that it can restore up to 100% of health and shields of all allies. That includes the lures, making Trinity the ideal candidate for babysitting the lures during the fights. And you'll also be giving all allies affected by your blessing a 75% damage reduction if you have enough power strength. Now, range is not important for this ability because it's based on your affinity range. And affinity range is always 50 meters. There are some ways to increase this, but I'm not going to be going over them here because they're really not useful for the fights. So if an ally is within 50 meters of you, they will receive the blessing, which is a pretty good distance. But again, you're not going to care about Well of Life, Energy Vampire, or Link, because it's just not going to be practical to use them with this build. And if you're running around trying to find targets to cast your other abilities on, you're going to be losing out on time where you could be charging your Void Strike. Which brings me to the next point. For Trinity, you want to be running Maturai with Void Strike. Void Strike increases your operator's damage by a multiplier based on how long you stay in Void mode, which is your operator's crouch. I have a whole video that goes over this that I'll link to at the top of this video if you want to know more. Now as for the Trinity build, remember we're only building for Bless here. So that means we want at least 150 power strength, which brings us to the cap of 100% restoration and 75% damage reduction. And then after that, we just want to be able to cast Blessing as much as we can, and as quickly as possible. So here I'm running Natural Talent to increase my cast speed, Fleeting Expertise and Streamline to increase my ability efficiency, giving me the efficiency cap of 175%, meaning that my Blessing costs as little as possible. And then I'm also running Prime Flow here, which is more of a personal preference on my part. You could also run mods like Handspring or another duration mod, but as a personal preference, I like Flow more. And then as for the duration mods, which you're going to want a little bit of duration. You don't have to go crazy with it, but you're definitely going to want some duration. I have Narrow-Minded and Prime Continuity, which together give me positive duration. And Vitality just adds a little bit of survivability. And for my aura, I have Corrosive Projection paired with Coaction Drift. If you don't know why Corrosive Projection is good for the fight, I'd suggest watching my Eidolon armor stripping video, which goes over all about how removing armor affects damage. And if your team's already running 3 Corrosive Projections, you can run something like Enemy Radar, which helps find Vombolus, or Energy Siphon in its place. And I'm running 2 Arcane Nullifiers to give me that 100% magnetic proc resistance, which I went over in depth in my equipment video. And as you'll notice, I have very negative range. But because Bless is based on your affinity range, having negative range here won't matter, like I mentioned earlier. As for the weapons I run with, I have a pretty standard Lanka with radiation damage build. I have a Sicarus Prime that again is running radiation damage. And I have a Sarpa here which can allow me to strip armor with Shattering Impact. But if you're in an organized group and don't care about stripping armor with Shattering Impact, you can run a normal melee weapon here if you want. And as for my companion, I have a Darza Kavat with a Cat's Eye buff, which will occasionally increase my critical strike chance. But that's going to cover it for the Trinity build. If you have any questions about my build, please leave a comment below. Now let's take a look at how you can play Trinity while in a group. Trinity's main role in the fight is babysitting the lures and making sure they don't die. She is easily the best at this. And that's all because, like I mentioned before, Bless. All you need to do is cast Bless once, and the lures and your teammates will go from almost 0 to 100%. But while you're doing the hunt, you really shouldn't be worrying too much about your teammates, because if they're playing properly, they should be in their operator form most of the time, which means they really should not be dying. If you're in an organized group, this is definitely less of a problem. But if you're running a public group with a bounty, people do tend to die way more often. And if you want to, you can cast Bless to heal them and give them a damage reduction, but really, you shouldn't be worrying about that too much. So just balance how often you think you should cast Bless with charging Void Strike, because for the most part, you just want to be sitting in Void mode and charging up Void Strike to take down the Eidolon shields only transferring into your Warframe to cast Bless when heavy damage is coming down on the lures. The most obvious example of this is during the Gantalist when it does its big Sunbeam attacks. Those are definitely one of the biggest culprits for killing the lures during the fight. And having a Trinity cast Bless when they get called down makes it very easy to avoid the damage. And if you're running Trinity in an organized group, typically it's your job, as soon as you enter the plains, to pick up to 7 lures. You need 8 lures total for the fight. And while you're picking up the 7 lures right off the bat, someone else in your team should be charging up 1 lure as quickly as possible to prevent the Terrorless from teleporting when you break its limbs. By picking up as many lures as you can immediately, it'll save your team time during the rest of the fight. But if you aren't able to pick up all of them at once, it's not that big of a deal. You can always just pick them up later when you have time. And to get the lures quickly, I'd recommend using an It's All Arcwing and Ciphers, which I went over in my equipment video. The route you see me take here is definitely the easiest for me. Most times, running this pattern will often net me 7 lures before coming back to the Eidolon. But depending on where the Eidolon spawns, it could be more efficient to pick up a lure closer by, especially if you get one of the 2 very far back spawns. But in most cases, especially if you have a fully modded It's All, this is going to be a great path to take. Once you have the rest of the lures, you can come back to the Terror List and help get its shields down. Remember, this is a strategy for an organized group. If you're playing solo or with the public bounty, you might want to get 1 lure and charge it yourself, and then maybe pick up 2 or 3 extras. Most players that queue up for public bounties won't be super experienced, so don't expect other people to pick up and charge a lure by themselves. Make sure you're getting it done before the first Terrorless limb pops. And then if you want to, between the Terrorless and the Gantalist, or when you have downtime, you can pick up the rest of the lures if no one else has yet. But public bounties are way more of an unorganized mess, so your results there are really going to vary. But it'll save you some time and frustration if you pick up all the lures yourself. And by playing Trinity in public game, it ensures that none of the lures will die, making your public bounty queue far more enjoyable. So after you get the rest of the lures picked up, you want to make sure that at least 2 more are charged before getting to the Gantalist. Oftentimes, lots of Vombulas will come to the Eidolon just before he stands up for the final time, allowing you to charge most of your lures. But especially on the Terrorlist, it's always good to be aggressive with charging the lures initially. During the Gantalist and the Hydralist, this is far less of an issue, because at that point, even if you're only occasionally killing Vombulists, your lures should be pretty well charged. But if you don't have at least 2 charged before the Terrorlist stands up for the final time, you're going to have to wait and kill Vombulists until the second one is charged, meaning you lose time during the hunt and it's less efficient. So after you've gotten the other lures as Trinity, your job is to basically just sit in void mode and shoot the Eidolon with your operator to take down the shields. That's it. I'll be going over different techniques for taking down Eidolon shields in its own video. But the basic principle is that every time you're not doing something, you should be in void mode charging. That's really it for Trinity. You get the lures, you babysit the lures, you make sure they don't die, and you charge up Void Strike and hit the Eidolon. If you're in a public group, then you're probably going to want to shoot as well, since public group DPS can be pretty unreliable. And even as Trinity, using Void Strike stacks will increase your damage to a respectable level against the Eidolon. And if this is the first video you're watching in my Eidolon Hunter series, I would suggest going back and watching a couple of the previous videos that go more in depth into some of the mechanics I covered here. But that's going to cover it for this video. I hope you guys found this helpful in understanding what Trinity's role is during the Eidolon hunt. This is the first video I've done going over a specific Warframe for the Eidolons. If you guys found anything unclear about this video, please let me know in the comments below, since I'm planning to do more videos like this, and any feedback you guys can give me will be much appreciated. But that's going to do it for me. If you found the video helpful, I'd appreciate it if you leave a like, and subscribe for future content.